Peter Beinart, the editor of New Republic. Good morning. Thanks very much for being with us.
Good morning.
Today, somewhat of a legend stops by Public Research. Peter Beinart, the heavyweight intellect of liberal Zionism who turned his back on the entire concept of a Jewish state in 2020. A Rhodes Scholar who made waves in 1995 when he became managing editor of the New Republic at the tender age of 24, becoming full editor-in-chief in 1999. Like many in D.C., Beinart backed the Iraq War in 2003. His reckoning over that mistake produced his book, The Icarus Syndrome, which explored America's post-Reagan hubris in foreign affairs. Then it turned to the Holy Land. In 2012, he wrote The Crisis of Zionism, dealing with his deep misgivings over the fading prospects of a two-state solution. And then in 2020, Beinart dropped a bomb on much of the Jewish community, abandoning Zionism altogether, embracing a binational Israel-Palestine state of equal rights, though he does still consider himself a cultural Zionist.
Like many other people, I thought that the answer could be a Jewish state alongside a Palestinian state. I came to the conclusion more recently that that vision is no longer tenable. Israel has made its control over the West Bank permanent, essentially, and that this vision of partition doesn't really reckon with some of the most fundamental issues in the conflict.
In the wake of October 7th, Beinart has released his first book since that ideological shift, Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza, A Reckoning, where he lays out his provocative belief that Israeli Jews would do better, not worse, as a minority in a one-state solution of equal rights.
In my experience, overwhelmingly, the Jews who know Palestinians best, under conditions that allow them to interact with them as equals, are the most confident that Jews and Palestinians can live together equally.
On today's Public Research, I had the pleasure of asking Peter the questions I've been dying to ask him for years. Things like, which side in the 1948 war would Peter Beinart have fought on? Would he stop calling for the end of a Jewish state if a true anti-Semite had a shot at the U.S. presidency? Why abandon a Jewish safe haven in an age of surging Nazism? Today on Public Research, the questions I've been dying to ask Peter Beinart for years. So quickly, I need to get these details out of the way. So in your vision of the one state, is the Jewish law of return enshrined in the Constitution, or could the Arab majority change that immediately?
Well, I guess in my vision would be, and first of all, I should say there's something a little strange about me offering a vision because I don't live in Israel and Palestine. So in a lot of ways, I think the more fundamental question for people who are Americans is what American policy should be to try to create a context in which Israelis and Palestinians actually can move towards, I think, a just solution. But I think my vision would be that there was a policy. There would be a policy in which which Jews and Palestinians who lived outside of Israel-Palestine, but who had not been there recently, that if they were in distress, if they were in danger, that they would have the right to go to the front of the immigration line. That there would be a policy of a policy that took had a special obligation to diaspora Jews and to diaspora Palestinians, let's say Palestinians in Chile who've been living there for 100 years or something like that, that if they were in danger, they could go to Israel and basically be allowed into the country and have a path to citizenship. What I don't think is necessary, and I don't think is fair, is an immigration policy which says that any Jew around the world, regardless of their circumstances, can come to Israel and become a citizen on day one, when there's no path to immigration for Palestinians, and Palestinian refugees who were expelled can't return.
So it would be a policy, or would it be, ideally, would it be in the Constitution?
Yeah, I think that in my vision, you have a binational state. So you have a state which recognizes that there are two groups that want that have national identities, right? And so those need to be recognized by the state. The very name Israel Palestine or Palestine Israel recognizes that, and that there should be a recognition that involves certain obligations to the representatives of those communities, to members of those communities who are abroad, but that it should be equal.
Okay, now what if the new, it'd be close, but it would be an Arab majority government, I guess. Pretty close, but it would be majority Arab probably. What if they just say, we want to, what are there like? There's millions of Palestinians in Jordan. Let's just say they just say, okay, we want to allow all of them to come in.
Well, I think that Palestinians who are refugees should have the right to return. So those Palestinians in Jordan were people whose families were in Israel until 1948 and were expelled. And I think they should have the right to return to this country. There is a Palestinian majority between the Mediterranean and the Jordan today, a small majority. It could be that for demographic reasons that majority grows. I don't believe in the principle of states trying to maintain particular religious, racial, ethnic compositions. I don't like it when Tucker Carlson says that about the United States, and I don't believe that about Israel and Palestine. I believe that states that treat people equally under the law. And I guess I would just say the last thing is, I think that if we look at states where a form of supremacy has been followed by legal equality, whether it's post-apartheid South Africa or Northern Ireland or even the United States, one sees that politics doesn't remain entirely binary, which is to say Palestinians and Jews, that's one identity they have, but there are other identities they have, right? It might well be that Palestinian business owners and Jewish Israeli business owners make common cause, and that people in labor unions and that people who are socially conservative. There are a lot of Israeli Jews and Palestinian Jews who have certain conservative views about gender and sexuality that would put them at odds with. So I don't think politics would be only on this one Palestinian Jewish axis.
Okay. So the new government, they could let in millions of Palestinians from Jordan, but a Jew like me who's not living, I'm not in danger, I could no longer just move there automatically.
Well, I don't think the situation for you and me, right, as Jews whose families have not lived in this place for perhaps millennia, right? I mean, if we believe that there was large numbers of Jews left after the destruction of the Second Temple and moved throughout the Roman Empire, I don't think that is the same situation as someone who themselves or their parents or their grandparents were expelled. I think those people should have the right to return. But I do think that I think that there should be an immigration path for people like you and me. We can immigrate to move to Israel if we want. And I also think that Jews who are in danger, let's say if they're in Ukraine or God forbid anywhere else, I think those people should be at the front of the line in terms of being able to go there and gain asylum and then gain citizenship. Yeah.
So I'm just going to get to the core thing I want to ask you. I'm sure you don't mean it this way, but there's a line in the book where you say something like American Jews don't have to look for hidden anti-Semitism in anthropology majors' papers or something.
Yes.
It sort of gives the suggestion that American Jews today are lack real anti-Semitism to complain about, that has to sort of invent stuff. I know you don't mean that, but one could take that implication. And I wonder how much our disagreement is about how bad we think the situation of anti-Semitism is. 3 of the top podcasts in America are Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan's the largest podcast. Are you aware that he just had on a Holocaust denier and this other Nazi guy?
Sorry, who did?
Joe Rogan.
Oh, no, I'm not.
Okay.
But I think, to be fair, that quote, I think the entire quote was something along the lines of, we don't need to look for the hidden anti-Semitism in every Lutheran grandmother or 19-year-old anthropology who's protesting Israel because they can't bear seeing more Palestinian children die. So that's a very different Now, again, it could be that there are also Lutheran grandmothers who are very upset about what's happening in Gaza, who also are anti-Semites, and we
Right,
would
right,
see
right, right.
that if they're interviewing Holocaust deniers and giving
Yeah.
them credibility. But I think those people, what you're talking about with
Okay.
Joe Rogan and Candace
Right.
Owen and Tucker Carlson is a very different ideological
Okay.
strain. They're not upset about what's happening to Palestinians.
Yeah.
They have a very particular right-wing
Right.
politics that expresses itself vis-a-vis Jews and other groups.
Right, right, right. I get what you're saying. So, but I think the situation is very bad and getting a lot worse rapidly with anti-Semitism. So I wrote this analogy, and this is the way I want to put this to you. I think you're brilliant. I think you make so many good, valid points and criticisms. But in your overall anti-Zionist pro-one-state solution conclusion, I feel this way about it. It's like we both live in this big apartment building. I'm on the 7th floor, you're on the 10th floor, and there's a literal fire of Nazism, which is now literally burning on the 1st and 2nd floor and moving fast. Maybe it will be stopped. We don't know. And for 80 valid reasons you articulate, you're essentially arguing, I say this reluctantly, but we need to replace the fire escape, which has unethical scaffolding, with a straw rope instead. The rope may not keep working. We may all die. But the South Africans did the rope thing, and they mostly survived, so we got to go with the rope. It's more ethical. And I'm saying you're a genius, but dude, there's a fire of genocidal Nazism rising up in the building, and you want to dismantle the fire escape we may need to use to survive? Are you insane?
So let me just understand. So I understand the metaphor. Is this building that we're living in, is that America and diaspora, other diaspora countries, or is it Israel, Palestine? Which is the building?
No, we're in the America building.
Okay, you're in the American building. So you're basically saying we have this fire of Nazism growing, and we need to have this escape to be able to go to Israel.
Yes.
So I guess I would say a couple things. The first is that one of the problems we have in this dynamic is that the ethno-nationalism that is growing, we see it represented by Trump and the AfD in Germany and in Marine Le Pen in France and Orban in Hungary. And Israel is part of this movement, right? So Israel is actually making alliances, right? Having very good relationships with many of the same people that I think are actually fomenting anti-Semitism in the United States, right? So that one of the problems with seeing Israel as the solution to this problem is that actually the entire ideological movement that I think threatens Jews, which is a movement that basically says countries should be controlled by one dominant tribe, and everybody else basically is an outsider or a guest, not a true member of that country. Israel in some ways is a model for exactly that kind of vision of the state, right? And that's why so many of these people who also traffic in anti-Semitism are so fond of Israel. So to me, the answer to this threat is to fight for the principle of equality under the law for everybody and band together with people of other groups in the United States who are also threatened by this racist, bigoted politics, right? And to me, that Jews have been very successful in the United States and have done because America has moved towards the principle of equality under the law. I also think if you really wanted to be crass about it, I mean, the Jews in the United States, if we, God forbid, got to a situation where life for Jews in the United States was too dangerous to stay here, right? And I hear people now, some people in the Trump era talking about maybe leaving the United States, right? Overwhelmingly, I don't hear them talking about going to Israel. I hear them talking about going to Canada, right? I mean, if the truth is that no law.
If they can go, you have to have a lot of skills to get into Canada. You have to.
Okay, I mean, or other or Europe or other Western nations, right? I just think that we have to fight against anti-Semitism as part of a rising set of interconnected bigotries that are rising in the United States. And I don't think we can say in good conscience to a Palestinian, because of the possibility that we could one day get to this situation in the United States. And by the way, Jews are not at the front of the line here, right? The trans people, in immigrants, non-citizens, Muslims, all of those people are in greater peril than we are. We can't say because we could potentially get to that place, you have to accept basically living under an apartheid system. To me, that's not the Judaism that's not Judaism as I see it.
So let me ask, how are you flexible at all? So let me just give you a scenario.
Sure.
Let's say, I don't know, it's 10 years from now. There's 5 openly anti-Semitic Republican senators. 5.
Mm-hmm.
There's a GOP primary, and Nick Fuentes is in it, and he gets 25%, running on a Deport All Jews platform openly, and he gets 25% of the Iowa caucus. Would that change what you would recommend as far as Israel-Palestine at all?
So I'll say 2 things. First, as a general principle, I have changed my mind about various things. I was not always a supporter of one equal state. I supported 2 states for most of my adult life. So I'm not going to say that I could not change my mind in response to changing circumstances, because I have changed my mind in response to changing circumstances. And I think that intellectual honesty requires admitting that things in the world have changed, or you've rethought things and you change your mind. I've done that in the past, and I can totally imagine doing that in the future. But I think that one of the problems that I have with your idea is that I don't think that Israel as a Jewish supremacist state is now and or is going to be in the future a place that keeps Jews particularly safe. Because one of the arguments in my book is that when you have a supremacist system that inflicts a lot of violence on people, that violence actually endangers everybody, right? So I actually believe that Israeli Jews would be safer in the long term in a state based on equality under the law than the supremacist system we have now.
They would be safer with the Arab majority.
There's an Arab majority now.
Okay. No, I see your point.
The question is, would they be safer surrounded by Palestinians who can vote?
Right.
I mean, let's look at the Palestinian citizens. Why are Israeli Jews less afraid of the Palestinian citizens? I think it's actually because they have more decent lives and because they have citizenship.
Right. Okay. So when Assad fell and the Alawites were being persecuted,
Yes.
I made this little thing to illustrate what Israelis feared.
The unification of Israel and the Palestinian territories was meant to usher in a new era of coexistence. But less than 2 weeks after the creation of the joint state, violence is spreading, and many Jewish citizens are fleeing. Armed Arab groups have launched attacks in cities, targeting the homes of former IDF officers and Jewish public figures. Synagogues were defaced or burned. Thousands are now trying to leave, by air and by sea. The new Arab majority government has condemned the violence, but enforcement on the ground is weak. Observers say police are hesitant to confront armed militias, though both the IDF and Palestinian groups had agreed to disarm before unification. Intelligence suggests Iran has funneled weapons to a new militia known as the Islamic Retribution Forces. Jewish leaders say most of their community is preparing to emigrate. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister praised what...
I'll just stop it there. How much of you fears that if your ideas ever came to pass that you would watch a news report like that?
Can I in a very Jewish fashion answer your question with a question?
Sure. Sure.
How many Palestinians do you know well?
Personally, or have I spoken to?
No, like personally, like you have relationships with them, you have friendships with them, you talk on a regular basis about
No, I don't. But I have interviewed more than a few. Yeah.
First of all, I think it's great that you're doing that, and I applaud you for that. I would just say this: I don't have a crystal ball. I can't predict the future, so I can't say with 100% certainty that any scenario is impossible, including the terrible one that you're suggesting. What I can say is this: in my experience, overwhelmingly, that Jews who know Palestinians better, under conditions in which they can come to know them as human beings, under conditions of some relative equality, because you need some relative equality to truly get to know someone as a human being. You can't have that kind of relationship when you have when one person is a soldier and one person is the person at the checkpoint under the soldier. You couldn't have had that kind of relationship in the segregated South between whites and blacks very easily. But in my experience, overwhelmingly, the Jews who know Palestinians best, under conditions that allow them to interact with them as equals, are the most confident that Jews and Palestinians can live together equally. Because although I know that you didn't mean in that video to suggest anything racist or dehumanizing about Palestinians, it plays into all of the racist and dehumanizing visions of Palestinians that suffuse Jewish discourse, which is to say that they would inflict violence on Jews because they just want, because that's kind of the way they are, or because they just want to be, because they don't want the same kinds of things that we do. No. They want dominion, they want domination. There are no Palestinians that I know virtually who I feel that way about. I think what Palestinians want is the same things that we want. And when you take away the brutal violence of oppression, I think what you find is the vast majority of people just want to live with basic rights equally and don't have a desire to foment a kind of massacre of a population.
I'm saying that there's the South Africa potential outcome, but there's also an Algeria, there's also a Kosovo, there's also, different this has gone different ways in history. It's not always the South Africa way.
Yes, but I think we have to look at the particulars of the situation. Even in Algeria, right? The Algerian national movement did not demand that the French Pied Noir leave. They actually, that was not their position, right? There was a dynamic in French politics in which people left, but it wasn't actually, even in Algeria, which is always cited as the position, right? I think that the more, I also think there's a problem in saying, because this could be a possibility one day, we should continue a system, right, that is brutally oppressing people, right? Because it is the brutal oppression that I think creates the possibility of that violence and counter-violence. I think in conditions in which people are treated humanely and decently, then those dangers go way down.
So you write essays about the Nakba, which means the catastrophe.
Yeah.
Since you believe in that concept, if we got in a time machine and Peter Beinart was there in 1948 and both sides said, hey, come join us, the Arab side and the Jewish side, which side would you have joined?
I mean, well, I will always be a Jew. So I have it would be not possible for me to not be a Jew, but I would have been a Jew like Martin Buber or Hannah Arendt or others who opposed partition into Jewish and Palestinian state and supported the idea of an equal binational state.
Do you think that in history there are situations where, I heard Daniel Gordis say this, where Hamas has forced us into a caveman morality of us versus them? And I wonder, do you think in history that sometimes there is not a nice Peter Beinart option? There's only ugly options.
Well, I think there are difficult trade-offs politically, but I find that framework really wrong-headed and dangerous. First of all, if Hamas has forced Israel into a caveman morality, then what explains what Israel's doing in the West Bank, where Hamas is not in charge? You've had a Palestinian Authority which has basically been collaborating with Israel for 20 years. Is Israel not brutally oppressing the people in the West Bank? So that Israel is doing what it's doing because of Hamas, I think is just completely ahistorical. The occupation began in 1967. Hamas wasn't created until 1987.
No, I agree with you there. What I really meant is probably that the end of that 1948 war, when they're thinking about stuff like, can we have a state that's 50%? That's the situation I'm talking about.
No, I mean, this was what Ari Shavit said, right? He said it was tragic that Israel had to expel, but that was the only way to create a Jewish state. And what Martin Buber said was precisely that, yes, the only way to create a state with a very large Jewish majority is going to be through an act of mass ethnic cleansing, which is profoundly immoral, and secondly, will sow the seeds of tremendous violence. Who do you think were those Palestinians who were committing all those acts of violence against Israel in the 1970s? They were the children of the people that Israel expelled. Do you know who and who do you think are the people in Gaza now who are committing some of these terrible acts of violence? They are the grandchildren of the people who were expelled from places like Ashkelon in 1948. So even from just a purely kind of hard-headed you're laying the foundations for more and more greater violence. Think about what Israel's doing now. We know Hamas recruits from the families of people that Israel has killed. You know, we could be having a conversation, God forbid, 50 years from now. If I live long enough, I probably won't. 30 years from now. And they're going to be these kids who experience what's been happening over the last 18 months, and they're going to dedicate their lives to fighting and to killing Israelis, God forbid, right? And so that's why I think this caveman morality is actually incredibly dangerous for Jews as well as Palestinians.
Okay, this is a difficult one. Francesca Albanese, Omar Bartov, Ross Siegel, who's alleged genocide a week after October 7th, Matt Leck, Emma Vigeland, they've all claimed there's a genocide in Gaza.
There is no world in which that is not genocide. I like using the term because I think it makes people understand what we are complicit in.
Why do I insist in calling it genocide? Because it's so difficult to prove intent. Why don't you go with war crimes and crimes against humanity? Because it's genocide.
I've researched this. I've looked it up to see if any of them have publicly called for Egypt to open its border with Gaza. I could not find any indication any of them have ever said that. How do you explain that?
I mean, to me, there are separate questions. I mean, whether it is or is not a genocide has got nothing to do with whether Egypt should open its border. If Egypt opens its border, I mean, yes, it would be good if Egypt opens its border because Palestinians could then survive this, over this absolutely destructive violence. On the other hand, I think it's pretty clear that if Egypt opens this border, right, then those Palestinians the border's never going to be back open to them to go back into Gaza, right? There's no reason in hell a Palestinian, given the Palestinian experience, would ever think that if they left Gaza, they will be allowed to return to Gaza, right? So you're basically talking about facilitating another act of mass expulsion.
But if it's a genocide, they're all going to die.
Well, but morally and even strategically, it seems to me, the right response to this is for the U.S. to stop providing Israel the weapons that's killing these people, right? That's where I think people should be focusing their energy. That's the problem, right? Not by saying, well, we can't do anything about that, so let's just all have them go be stateless refugees. They were made refugees once in 1948. Let's make them go be stateless refugees again because we can't do anything about the fact that Israel's going to kill them.
Okay, but if we were alive during the Holocaust, and the USS St. Louis came to America with the German Jews, me and you would have both been writing op-eds saying, let them in, right? We wouldn't be concerned that, Germany's going to take their property.
But the difference is that, the difference in the analogy is that in this circumstance, the people being killed are being killed with American weapons. So America's primary moral, I'm not against America letting in Palestinians who for asylum and refugees, but America's fundamental responsibility is to stop giving Israel the weapons that kill these people, right? That seems to me, and if we did that, we wouldn't have to worry about the situation of people fleeing for their lives because our bombs wouldn't be killing all these people. And we could also demand that Israel allow humanitarian aid in, which we don't do.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Sure, absolutely, Daniel.
Have a
Take
great
care.
day.